Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Lunch Update, our program to help you stay curious, connected, informed, live in real time. This conversation, like all of our Lunch Update programs, are made possible by our presenting sponsor, Perkins Coie, and also like to thank our small and emerging business sponsor, Easy Office Products. As always, we do record these, and they are available on our website at madisonbiz.com. Just things that you want to hear again, replay, share with others, please go to our website later this afternoon, and we will have it posted. Coming up, we'll be joined by Madison's Mayor, Satya Rhodes-Conway, for the first of two programs featuring the Madison mayoral candidates. But first, let me give you a few chamber updates. In addition to the mayoral race, the field is now set for the spring common council elections as well in Madison. There are 45 candidates who have submitted all the required paperwork for one of the 20 aldermanic seats. That's a significant number of people running, and there will be a number of primaries in 8 council districts and 6 additional seats that are contested. The Chamber's endorsement process now begins with questionnaires being sent to the entire candidate field, asking them for their opinions on important issues related to business. Then the candidates that do decide to seek our endorsement will be invited in for an interview, and those endorsements will be offered based on an alignment with our mission and our agenda and working with our other community partners. For your ability to note, the Madison, well, I guess the primary in general, but certainly we're talking about the Madison Common Council and the mayor's election. The primary is February 21st with the general election on April 4th. We also invite you to celebrate the year-round beauty of Greater Madison with first ever Frozen Night Out, so an add-on to our Big Night Out series. It coincides with the 2023 Frozen Assets Festival. And the Chamber is partnering with the Clean Lakes Alliance for this event at the Edgewater Hotel, where we will always feature the networking and the drinks, but this year we're adding s'mores games and a few other things. Admission is free for Chamber members. You can find more information and register at our website, madisonbiz.com. You can also see it in the chat. And lastly, we have locked the dates for our 2 biggest Chamber events of the year. Our marquee events, the 9th annual Icebreaker Luncheon at the Cole Center will be on April 13th. And our 70th annual dinner will be at Monona Terrace on October 17th. Icebreaker and annual dinner each sold out in record time last year. So sponsoring is a great way, maybe the best way to guarantee that your business has a spot. Even better, if you commit before January 23rd, we will lock it in at the lower 2022 rate. Contact the Chamber team for sponsorships, to reserve a table, or to be added to the wait list and notified when registration opens. As a reminder, annual dinner sold out in 72 hours. All right, and now to our guest. Joining us today is the mayor, Satya Rhodes-Conway. She is the 58th mayor of Madison, having been elected in 2019. Her previous elected experience includes 3 terms on the Madison Common Council, where we shared a term together as colleagues. Before being elected mayor, she was the managing director of the Mayor's Innovation Project and the senior associate at the Center for Wisconsin Strategy at UW-Madison for 13 years. And so with that, please join me in welcoming Mayor Rhodes-Conway. Hey, Mayor.
Hi, Zach.
How are you?
Good. Good to see you.
You too. I noted when we were off camera that you were the first guest on Lunch Update, which is a product of the pandemic. We launched this as a way to communicate information. You were our first guest, and you are now also our first guest who has ever been live with me.
Live in person.
So
I feel like the next level is that we'll actually have lunch.
That's right. Which will allow us to eat.
Yeah.
Right? Some of the conversation, we've known each other for a long time, but also have a serious question. And we've asked others to give us some input into what they think. The first question was going to be why you're running for re-election. But last night I was meeting with a prominent business leader in Madison. And the statement was made to me is, I'm curious what the mayor's vision is. So maybe not just the why are you running, but what is it that drives you to run? So talk to us about the vision that you have for Madison.
Yeah. You know, when I was deciding to run now about 5 years ago, really the vision that I brought in was having worked with, studied other cities around the country, and seeing some of the trajectories in Madison. I felt like I have a vision for our community that is one where we thrive, where we have a robust economy, where everybody can afford to live here and has a choice of neighborhood to live in. You know, whether we're talking about teachers or firefighters or baristas, want us to be a welcoming community, an accessible community, and ultimately a successful community. And that vision hasn't changed. I think that we have made progress towards that, and I'm looking for another 4 years to keep pressing on all of those fronts, on the things that make Madison such a great place to live. We take them for granted, but they could easily slip away, right? If we don't pay attention to our transportation infrastructure, we could be stuck with the kind of congestion that we see in places like Austin, right? If we don't pay attention to housing, we could run into the problems that places like San Francisco and DC and you name it have faced. So my vision is really that we pay attention to our trajectories and that we get ahead of problems by working on them now rather than waiting until they're too difficult to solve.
Right. And so many of those cities that you named are places where they had to have seen it coming and did nothing.
Right. Or they had really key choices, right? I mean, Austin failed to invest in their transit system sort of famously, and then has suffered the consequences.
Right. But those are to change the things that come with trajectory. I think we both feel the sense of Madison. I tell people, I think Madison's trajectory is largely locked when it comes to the economy. I think there's things that we can do to hurt it and help it.
Well, we have so many assets here, right? Yes, and so many, this is a weird way to say it, but like so many fixed assets, right? We have so many strong institutions that aren't going anywhere. I think you're right. I think we will continue to drive the state's economy and be successful. The things that can trip us up, though, would be, for example, if people literally can't afford to live here. We're already losing talent because of the cost of housing.
Absolutely.
So that could derail us a little bit. Yes, I think you have to be able to look forward.
Right. So these leaders in these other cities either made wrong decisions or didn't see it coming, or tried to get ahead of it too late. Being reasonable, you get optimistic. In a second term, what do you think you can actually solve that stops us from making some of those same mistakes? What are the things that you look at a second term and say, if I had 4 more years, these are the things that I think I could get accomplished that would change that?
Yeah. Well, so first and most important is just bringing the attention to it, right? So, for example, in housing, prior to me being elected, we were producing fewer housing units than the number of people moving into Madison per year. In the 4 years that I've been mayor, we have shifted that. We are now producing, I think the numbers will show, when we roll up 2022, I think that they will show that we are now producing enough housing units to keep up with population growth. We still have a backlog, right? We still have to work on that. But we have permitted in 2022, we permitted more housing units downtown than the last 5 years together. So part of it is just bringing the attention to the problem and being willing to work on it. Part of it is looking for innovative solutions. Prior to my election, the city had really nailed how to do affordable housing tax credit projects in the city. Great job. And we continue to do that. It's not enough, right? We have to think about other innovative ways to produce not just affordability in housing, but to produce housing across the board. That's something that I brought to the table. And we are continuing to look. I mean, just this week, I met with staff on what's next on housing, right? How do we get to be even more innovative in looking at our housing market and how we can improve it? So pay attention. Like, I think you like to talk about falling in love with the problem, right? So you got to fall in love with the problem, right? You got to think about where is the innovation? Where's the growth edge? What can we do? And then, there's a little bit of like, you got to stay committed, right? You can't, Madison is famous for staying in we fell in love with the problem stage, right? So you got to fall in love with the problem, but then you got to fall in love with the solution too. And so we can't sit in the talking about it. We have to push through to the action. And that's uncomfortable for some people, but I think that over the last 4 years, my administration has been successful in moving us into action and actually getting things done.
So when you think about those big issues, right? And I know for sure that 3 of the issues that you raised in your first election were transportation / transit, housing, climate change.
Mhm.
So when you think about the big things that are facing us, what's the biggest priority? I know you're going to want to say they're all priorities.
No, but that's fair. I mean, I think in the long term, the biggest thing is housing, because if we don't get that right, I think it has the sort of worst negative consequences for our community long term, right? I think in the short term, the biggest concern is public safety.
Do you think it's the same for business, or do you think there's a different set of challenges for businesses?
I think for business, I mean, obviously I'm not a business person, but I think housing stays very close to the top of the list. I think I would include childcare, probably above transportation, for example, right now. But I think public perception of safety and just sort of the public perception of Madison in general is right up there as a concern for business as well.
It's good, because I want to get to public safety and I want to get to childcare. But I wondered, as you reflect, as we start to move to the future, just one last sort of retrospective question. What do you think the biggest accomplishment of the first term was?
That's a great question. And I don't think anybody asked that yet. Well, I mean, the sort of obvious answer is that after 30 years of trying to get some sort of rapid transit in Madison, we broke ground on a bus rapid transit system. And that was a significant amount of work. It will bring in a significant amount of federal dollars to our community. And I think will really transform transit in Madison. So that's the sort of big sort of single project that I think is the biggest. Right. Some of the other stuff that people don't see as much is the work that we've done internal to the city to be a better employer, which I think bears fruit in the long term in better public service.
Is there, I think you're going to want to say pandemic, because maybe I'll couch just to say, is there something other than the pandemic that you felt like it just didn't go how you thought it would have when you got elected in April?
That's a great question also. Yeah, there's any number of things that didn't go as I expected. Certainly the pandemic. I think didn't expect how much of the job was, being an employer. And I've learned a lot on that front. But I think we're making some significant progress there. The other thing that I would point out, I think, is, and I'll just give you one example of it, is the need to manage change. So one of the things that we did in my first budget was we shifted parking enforcement from the police department to the parking division, which is a very logical shift. It actually, now that it's underway, I think is bearing some really important fruit in collaboration. But it was very hard for the employees concerned, and I didn't do enough change management work in advance of that decision, and so it was pretty rocky. But what I learned from that is the amount of work that you need to do on really anything to manage change, to get people comfortable with the idea of change, and to sort of bring people on board with whatever the effort is.
So I said you're going to want to say the pandemic, and pandemic's probably the right answer, the thing you could have never imagined. I mean, I don't think there's any way that you, me, any community leader could have ever predicted, forecasted, imagined what we encountered in March of 2020.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think that there's a lot of appreciation in this office for the relationship that we had during, and certainly there are times, and I tell people that we probably laughed at times, we cried at times, that we yelled at each other at times.
All of those things happened.
But that there were open lines of communication. Yeah. You came on the show multiple times, you pushed public health to be on the show a handful of times, and some of the best information sharing that we were able to get for the business community came by you and the public health department saying, yes, we're going to come and have some uncomfortable conversations. But if you look at that and say, it's not to say, let's talk about where we disagree, but I'm curious, as with hindsight now being 2020, pun intended, is there something you think now, like, if knowing today what you knew now, knowing today what you could have known then, would you have done something different? I think it might be important too, just for historical purposes, because someone's going to have a pandemic again.
Yeah.
And, a century went by and none of us knew what the mayors did then.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if you think back now, like, not to fault you.
So it's a totally fair question. I think the thing that I really wish we had started sooner and done better on was just much more robust and regular communication. I think we did a decent job, but I wish that we had been more intentional about setting up structures for communication. And you complimented us for coming and working with you, but I return the compliment because you provided us a method to communicate with the business community that we wouldn't otherwise have had. And so I think if I had to do it again, which really, please, let's not do it again, that I would jump much sooner to build those partnerships, to try and make sure that we were doing a much better job of reaching every sector of our community with regular communication. That's probably the biggest thing. There's other stuff that, we didn't know that the state was going to lose their ability to do public health orders and that we were going to sort of be on our own. And so if we had known that, we probably would have thought through a little bit better the framework for those. But maybe the takeaway there is for us to to build again more of the structures. And one of the things that we're doing, which I wish we had then, is my latest budget includes a full-time emergency manager for the city, and I think that would have been great to have that position pre-pandemic. But now part of that person's job will be to think through what are the lessons that we learned and how we build out the structures and the plans so that we are ready next time.
So you mentioned public safety as one of the sort of top issues that you think are facing the city. And certainly with growth comes challenges with crime and safety, some perceived, some real. It's hard to sort of know because people say I feel a certain way, and it's hard to discount how people feel. I'm curious if you think Madison has gotten safer, less safe, or largely stayed the same over the last 4 years.
I think on most fronts, it has largely stayed the same. I think that what we saw, and I actually don't ascribe this to population growth, but to the pandemic, because what we saw across the country is spikes in certain types of violence. So we certainly saw more traffic crashes across the country, more shots fired, and I'm not entirely sure why, but more stolen cars. I don't know what the line with the pandemic is there, except maybe kids weren't in school. But that's a consistent pattern from city to city to city across the country. And Madison faced all that too. None of those things is acceptable in our community. What we're experiencing now, those levels are still too high. But I'm really impressed with the way that Chief Barnes has looked at evidence-based strategies and at the data of what we're actually experiencing in Madison and developed very strategic approaches to each of those three categories of violence. And his approach is working. I haven't seen the full 22 numbers yet, but as of October of last year, shots fired were down 20%. Year over year. The stolen cars is a little different because we had a spike with the Kias and the Hyundais, right? Yep. But we also have good evidence in key corridors that traffic crashes. I should qualify this, that fatalities and serious injury crashes are down. So I think on the baseline, we're sort of where we were. Madison's a really safe city. In certain categories, we've had challenges just like everybody else, but I'll say I think our trajectory is going in the right direction, where that is not necessarily true for other cities.
So, I started by saying the data and the feeling sometimes don't align.
Absolutely.
And we are an organization that's going to talk about a safe city because it is a safe city, and it's part of our ability to recruit and retain people is to make sure people know that it's a safe city. There are those, though, that would hear us talk and say you're both wrong. And so it feels less safe today. And I think you hit the three that I would have highlighted. That I think these are the reasons why. And I agree, we're impressed with what Chief Barnes is doing as well. as you think about trying to further tamp down or bend that trajectory downward on specifically those areas, what do you think the next term looks like in trying to address those? Is it just Chief Barnes, or is there stuff that the mayor's office and the council can?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because it's not just the police department. And I think that what they have been doing is necessary and really important. And one of the things that we put in, not the 23 budget, but the 22 budget, was a new, pretty high level position to do their strategic planning and data analysis. And that person is on board, and he's making a big difference already. So I would expect more evidence-based policing, more data-driven approaches to crime and safety issues from the police department. But one of the key things that we instituted under my administration is we now have every other week, we have a meeting with police, usually it's the chief, public health, particularly the violence prevention unit in public health, community development, and my office. And we have been working on data sharing. We have been working on identifying trends and both the immediate interventions, but also the long-term investments to get to some of the root causes of those trends. And I have just seen, just by virtue of having those meetings, that the communication, the relationships are vastly improved from what they were. So I think what going forward you can expect is that we're going to have a citywide approach to these issues. And there are environmental interventions that we can look at, that we are looking at. And we are working with public health. They've produced a violence prevention roadmap that we are investing in. And we're investing in community-based organizations. And we are working through community development to invest particularly in youth programming and employment opportunities. And I think you really need that full suite of things in order to not just get the spikes, right, and have the immediate interventions, important, but also to then make sure that you're addressing the root causes behind why is this happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe in that joint approach, and in particular, taking a public health approach to violence, because I think that will bear the long-term fruit.
And in that, there's funding that's required.
Yes.
And I would say that you're giving credit where credit's due. You continue to fund alternative things, but also the police department itself. That in tough budgets, you continue to prioritize public safety in those areas. But let's transition to tough budgets then, because Madison's budget's never easy. We both spent time in the council. I think we both, for maybe different purposes, had very analytical eye towards expenses. And when we were on the council, and in that tough budget, you've got the state government pushing down, limiting you in some ways. You've got other things that limit you in other ways. Then you had a pandemic and a bunch of other challenges. And then you had some federal funding that kind of smooth things over, which you've acknowledged publicly is going to come to an end and will likely cause some problems for us budget-wise. What does that look like? I mean, when you think about you're asking for another 4 years on the job, knowing that you were going to end up with
I may be crazy.
I mean, you know how bad the budget could be. But for people to understand what that looks like, what does the next couple of years look like for Madison on funding, and if things don't change, what's at risk? Yeah,
it's an excellent question. I think that at the end of the day, it's who is in the mayor's office is really important, because budgets are an expression of our values. And it would be, you could imagine solving Madison's future budget problems by taking deep cuts in the sort of discretionary places, right? And that's some of the services that are most important to Madison's community. And so I think it is really important to have somebody who understands Madison's priorities and values, helping to guide the budget process and protect the things that are important to us, and come up with solutions that mean that we're not having to, completely cut our community services budget, just for example. But the challenge is real. And we expect in, sort of 24, 25, 26, that we're not going to have, and the federal funding has a little bit of a tail, but it's going to diminish dramatically. And I don't think we'll see any more big inputs of federal funding. It will certainly go after every penny we are eligible for, but it's not going to be at the scale that we saw with ARPA. I am cautiously hopeful that something will change at the state level and to increase the amount of shared revenue that is coming, not just to Madison, but to communities across Wisconsin. That's frankly essential for the long-term success of our state. But who knows exactly what that looks like.
Do you think that comes without a corresponding tax cut, though? It just feels like everything that I see being signaled is, yeah, well, it's on the table, but it's got to be a dollar for dollar cut somewhere else.
I don't know. I mean, the conversations that I'm hearing are, again, I'm cautiously optimistic, but you never know what it is until they vote on it, right? So we are going to be in a situation where we continue to have a structural deficit, which is the gap between, for folks that don't follow these things, is the gap between our cost to continue and the amount that we're allowed to raise. And because the majority of what we're allowed to raise comes from the property tax, we actually have to be very mindful of how much we're putting on the property tax and what a burden that puts, particularly on single family homeowners. And so how do you fill those gaps, right? We have, for a good decade, we sort of managed to paper them over at the city, and this was not obviously under my administration, but we found various fees and places that we could shift things around, and there's still some of that we can do, and we're looking at all of our options, but there's only so far you can go on that front. And so you do have to start looking at service levels and having, I think, a tough community conversation about where are we willing to accept a lower level of service to balance against property taxes or additional fees. And then, sort of looming out there is the question of, would you ever want to go to referendum? And I think that is a conversation that we will have to have over the next 4 years. And we are working on a number of things in the city to look at what our service levels are, where there is room for savings, where there are efficiencies still. I mean, we've squeezed a lot of the efficiencies already, but there may be more, and we're always looking for that. But we're also starting to plan our operating budgets on a 5-year cycle, which has never been done before. And I think it's actually really important that we do that, because the decisions that we are going to have to make can't be 1-year decisions.
So you have 2 budgets. Most people probably don't realize that you actually have your operating budget that we've been talking about, but you also have your capital budget, which is sort of your long-term big projects. It's what we would call general obligation borrowing has been going up for a long time. It's starting to get into some thresholds that might change ratings and things. It feels like you've got pressure to do big things. We put pressure on you to do big things. The stuff you're talking about, your key, those are not small. BRT is not a small endeavor, right?
Well, and perhaps most importantly, the fact that our city keeps growing means that we have continued infrastructure build out needs.
Right. So knowing that you have this pressure to enable the growth that we know is necessary, to respond to community needs of wanting to be a special place that looks special and acts special, but also having a growing amount of the operating budget, our paycheck going to pay our debt service. How are you balancing that? But maybe more importantly, the question I really wanted is, what are you concerned about where we are at from how much of our operating budget is going to have to go to general obligation payments?
I am concerned. I think that you have to watch that number very, very carefully. And I would like to see it go down. And I think that at the sort of the bottom line, you sort of referenced this, but the bottom line is we don't want to get into a territory where we lose the excellent rating that we have now. Because that allows us to borrow money at a rate that is better than most cities. And we absolutely don't want to jeopardize that. So those are the things that we keep our eyes on very carefully. I also think that, I don't want to keep saying go to the federal government, but there is a lot of infrastructure money out there. at the federal level, and we do need to do everything we can to capture it and bring it home to Madison. That doesn't solve the whole problem, though. So it is going to take really concerted look at the capital budget and to really prioritize which projects need to happen quickly and which projects we can continue to push off into the long term. And every capital budget that I've put forward, the level of borrowing has been lower than what agencies were requesting. So that will, I assume, continue to be true, and probably that gap will get bigger over time. That we're just not going to be able to do everything that agencies want to do, but we're going to have to make some tough choices and set some priorities.
One of the reasons why growth is important is net new construction is a way for us to keep our budget going.
Yes,
that it's something that is excluded from the levy limits, allows us to gain more tax revenue in order to fund the operation and things that we all find to be important. When you got elected, knowing you, I told our board and the business community, she is, and I mean this in a very heartfelt, positive way, she's a policy wonk. And the upside is we will be able to, it won't be, a lot of decisions won't be based on emotionally, based on data. So we're gonna have to bring data in. But she will drive policy, right? It won't, it's that's gonna be part of who she is. You had the pandemic, it's a lot of policy got set off to the side. We're starting to see the effects of policy coming forward. So most of it around transportation, some of it now around energy, and I'm, as you think about,
and housing, it's a little hidden, but housing as well.
There are those that would say that what we need most right now is new infill commercial development, and some of these policies could become headwinds to that. How do you respond to those that would say your policies actually are interfering with what we need most right now?
So I think I would completely agree that one of the things we need most is new infill development. I'd argue that we might need more new housing infill development than commercial at this point. I think there's a fair amount of play in the commercial market, and that I'm actually more focused on filling those vacancies than on creating new stock. But yes, I think that the thing that we are trying to balance is how do we stay true to Madison's values, and to being a very livable community, while also enabling the kind of infill development that we absolutely need to see. I think on balance, Madison is a very attractive place to be, and will continue to be an attractive place to build. I think we have a little bit of a bad rap based on our history, which I think is maybe not fair at this point in time. And I think that the kinds of policies that we're putting forward are really about preserving our values and our quality of life, while still encouraging and enabling the kind of development that we need.
So we only have a little bit of time, so I don't want to spend a bunch of time on one issue. We'll have plenty of time to debate it on the council floor and elsewhere. But energy benchmarking is one where it's a new initiative that's been introduced, and it's new in the sense of was introduced almost a decade ago. It's back, which is that requires businesses of certain size to submit information into a portfolio manager, which then allows them to benchmark against themselves and others. But then the difference is that the city then has access to that data, and just by a product of open records law likely becomes an open record. And there's also a tune-up provision in there where businesses would have to every 4 years do some tune-ups. I'm curious as to before your time, but the council and the previous mayor agreed to a voluntary program. Why do you think that a mandatory approach is necessary in this moment, as opposed to trying to develop a voluntary, or just do what we agreed to before, or develop a new voluntary approach that says, this isn't something we should disagree on. We don't disagree on it, right? We all think benchmarking is good. We all think climate change is real. We think we need to rethink our mix and use of energy. So why the mandatory approach, which causes a fight, versus a voluntary approach, which creates collaboration?
Well, so I think it is important to start where we agree, and I think we all agree that benchmarking does show you opportunities to save energy and money, and
100%.
and that doing building tune-ups both saves energy and saves money and improves the climate. And that's what we're trying to get to, right? We know that large commercial buildings are the largest contributors in the sort of building area to greenhouse gas emissions, and that buildings in general are one of the two largest contributors in the city of Madison. And so why now? Why a mandatory instead of a voluntary? I mean, because frankly, the voluntary didn't work.
But we didn't try it.
Well, we did, perhaps not in the most robust way, perhaps not in the way that I would have done it if had I been mayor 10 years ago, but we did try it. And I think we have seen some property owners take amazing steps and do great work, and others, do nothing. And so we don't have time, right? I mean, all the science indicates that we have to make a difference this decade in our emissions if we're going to have a planet that's livable in the long term for humans. And so there's a sense of urgency here that I think is undeniable. Now, I understand the question about the data being public is a very sensitive point. If we could figure out a way around that, we would. And we, as you know, we've been back and forth a lot on this, and haven't solved it yet. If somebody can come up with something still, I'm very open to that. But but I think at the end of the day, this does benefit building owners. It is going to save money, and it benefits the city by reducing our collective emissions. And I think that's important.
So just a final question. So the knock on voluntary programs nationally is they produce about 10% compliance, right? That's what they say. I don't know if that's a true number, but that's the argument for mandatory.
Yeah, I think it's a little less than that, but yeah.
But here we know there are 600 or 700 buildings, but we've asked city staff, just tell us what the buildings are so we can engage with the building owners. They're like, well, that's work we'll do after it passes, we'll identify them. But if we were able to find out that actually of those 600 or 700, that a large number are already benchmarking, does that change the necessity
I would be
for a mandate?
delighted if that was
But
true.
does it change the need for a mandate?
No, I think it doesn't, because if you have a bunch of people that are already doing it, then they'll be fine. Right? What the reason that you go to a policy, to an ordinance, is to catch the folks that aren't doing it, and to move the entire sector. So I'd be delighted if this was something that most buildings were already doing. I think it's probably not. But I think that we've got enough pathways to compliance in the ordinance that if anybody is already doing this, it's going to be really easy for them to comply with the ordinance.
All right. I'll fight for another.
All right. I look forward to it.
Childcare. You brought it up as identified something that challenge facing businesses. We couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
but that's true. We're looking at what some private sector solutions might look like. We were just out in DC meeting with our congressional delegation, saying we believe there is some type of public-private partnership that could create something new. I personally believe, this organization believes, that this is a way to differentiate Madison. That you say this is a Madison model. A lot of cities want a model.
Yes.
And when they can,
yes,
this could be an opportunity. What do you think could happen in the mayor's office or in the city that could help something like that become reality?
I'd say a couple of things. Firstly, I think it's really important that we lean into this question of a public-private solution on childcare, because I frankly don't think we make progress any other way. The problems are too sticky, and we absolutely need employers to be part of the solution here. I think on the city side, there's a couple of things. One of the super practical that we can and should do is, we traditionally look at childcare providers as providers of a service in our community, and so we deal with them sort of in the community service realm of the city. That's true and good. They're also small businesses, so we need to think about them in the economic development and small business realm of the city, and think about how we can support them as small businesses to be more successful, to have better margins so they can pay their folks more and retain them, which is one of the biggest problems in the industry. And so I think that's a sort of easy and obvious thing that we can do. And just while I'm on small businesses, right, I think that we could do a better job of making city government transparent, do a better job of communicating with small businesses and supporting them. So there's work to do there too. The other thing that I think just collectively, and certainly the city has a role in this, but I think it's a question for the kind of the table, is looking at the entire picture, the entire economic picture of a childcare business, and thinking about, are there innovative places where someone could intervene to make that picture better? Because at the end of the day, what you're stuck between is the cost to the parents and the need to pay the providers more. And so that those two things are in opposition to each other. And so how do we think about lowering costs somewhere else, right? Can we lower the cost of space? Can we lower the cost of utilities? Can we lower the cost of supply? What can we do to create a little ease there? And so the first and most obvious thing is to talk to childcare providers about where they feel the pain points are and where we could maybe make a difference. And so I think that conversation is worth having. There may be ways that the city can intervene or help going forward, and I'm interested in looking for those.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time, and I find myself at a leadership dilemma. I have two questions. One is about the advanced economy, something that this organization is passionate about. The other is about equity and diversity and inclusion, something this organization is passionate about.
Yes.
So I have to make a decision. Okay. I'm going to go to the equity discussion.
Yes.
So during the pandemic, our board decided that our top priority would be to take a very ambitious position, which was to make this region the best place in America for a person of color to own and operate a business. Yeah. There are certainly things that your administration did during the pandemic that stood up, pop-up shops, there's new grants, there's loans, but do you think in order to do something different than what everybody else is doing, again, it might take a big swing.
Yeah.
Do you think there's something more than what you're doing and what we're doing that could be done to truly change what we know is the wrong trajectory for Madison when it comes to equity?
Yeah, that's a great question. We could talk about that for an entire hour. I will say briefly that I think, so yes, we have stood up a number of different programs that I think help. What I'd like to look at is how do we knit those together better, and how do we support an entrepreneur's experience from the seed, the idea, right, on through success. And some of that is about funding. Some of that is about mentorship and networking. Some of that is about training. Some of that is about real estate. And I think that we are working in all of those areas a little bit, but I think we need to get more organized about it. And I think that's probably the next big step for us. And the other big thing that I would just highlight is perception, right? And so the work that you're doing, the work that Destination Madison is doing, I think is really important to help the reality be that we are a more welcoming and equitable place, but also to change the perception of Madison. As the reality changes, we have to work on the marketing, if you will, as well.
Agreed. Well, we're out of time. I want to give website if people will have more information about your campaign.
Yes, satyaformadison.com.
Great. And they can find ways to communicate with you and your team there as well. Any final words before I close?
Yeah, well, just thank you very much. And thanks everybody for tuning in. There's a primary in February and a general in April, and I'd be delighted to have your support.
Well, thank you, Mayor, for joining us. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, Perkins Coie. I want to thank all of you for joining us as well, taking time out of your day. Join us on February 9th when we welcome Goya Reyes, the second of the two programs featuring Madison mayoral candidates. Have a great day.